Hey everybody, Eric in the garden. I want to do a quick video on what you can be doing in your garden, your rose garden now. We've got a lot of comments on how warm it's been. Should I start pruning? Should I start fertilizing? You shouldn't really do any of those things yet. You may still be a few weeks ahead of your normal schedule eventually. We usually prune here in Eastern North Carolina sometime the last week of February or early March. We're not even past the 10th day of February yet. So we still have a couple weeks to go. So hang tight. I'll show you a couple things you can be doing, however, here in the meantime. If you've watched any of the last couple videos that continue to weed, a lot of the gardens are in pretty good shape, and I'll probably do a separate video on this using my hoe for some of the bigger weeds. And if you watch one of my videos from the summertime when I want to get in there to tighter or closer locations near the rose bush, I use this. But I'm focused on weeding. You can see the leaves on the roses are really pushing out. We've been extremely warm, as a lot of us have been across the United States this winter, but there's just not much you can do. If we get a cold snap, these leaves are going to be toast. But I have so many canes to work with, and in worst case scenario, that top growth will die off and I'll just prune back lower. But you can see even farther down on the bush, the bud eyes are active. These are going to be hardier than the leaves themselves. But I have a bunch of growth lower on the cane that I can go to, and in an absolute worst case scenario, you go from leaves on the end to active bud eyes pushing out. And if you keep going down the bush lower and lower, these are much more closer to dormancy. What I mean by that is they are tougher in terms of they're not as far along. And I apologize, it's hard to zoom in on some of this, but they're not as far along, so they're more dormant, so they can take temperatures in the mid-20s to upper 20s, whereas these farther up on the bush can't. So bottom line, don't do your pruning any earlier. I mentioned the last week of February here. I may bump it back by a week or 10 days, but don't get crazy with anything. The reason why you don't want to do any pruning, that will stimulate growth. And again, you can't hold Mother Nature back. These are fully leafed out. I can't do anything about that, but I don't want to pile on and stimulate the bush at all by pruning or fertilizing. A lot of this fertilizer relies on organisms in the soil to break it down, especially if you're using organic. So until the soil temperatures get warm, they may not really be working as well. In addition, we don't want things growing. So just let things be. Don't fertilize, don't prune early. I've been so focused on the garden weeding wise, I'm hustling because here in a couple days we're going to have more rainfall. I want to clean the beds, get a pre-emergent down. I'm going to do a video on that, how to apply it and what success I have, because this will be the first time I've used it on the rose garden. But I've been so focused on weeding. We're just after about 5:30. You can see we're almost getting towards sunset here. So every half an hour I get after work, I'm weeding. I want to get this completely weed free. So I've got one more bed there in the back to go before I do the pre-emergent. I've lost sight of other things that are happening in my garden, and that is disease. I'll have to look closely. It's either black spot or it could be a touch of downy mildew. That is not good. It's in cooler, wet weather. We haven't had a ton of wet weather here in Eastern North Carolina, but we had a touch of it last week. So I'm gonna, once we get a little less windy, hit that with something for the downy mildew and black spot, just to make sure it doesn't spread in the garden. So what shouldn't you be doing in the garden? If you're ahead of schedule, don't prune early, don't fertilize, but inspect your leaves. If you have leaves, you have the potential for diseases. I wouldn't worry about pests, not seeing a lot of those, not seeing aphids or anything like that, but start checking out your bushes. It's never too early to spray. You certainly don't want to spray on a cold morning, or if it's going to get below freezing that night, you want the product to dry. But if you have a day that's not windy and it's up in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and you're starting to see some disease on your leaves, you can start your spray program. And the more I look at that, that might be a little bit of downy mildew. Black spot is something that you can get rid of. Maybe not completely, but you can live with a little bit of black spot, but you don't want downy mildew spreading through the garden. So I'm going to have to get on that pretty quickly. You can see the rest of the leaves are fine. So right now it's just pretty much contained to this Marlins day. We aren't expecting any rain tonight or tomorrow, so I'll get out there and spray, and you can see a lot of it on the upper part of the bush as well. So since it's crossing the margins, that might be downy. I'll have to look at that closer. So just to summarize, again, if your roses are leafed out, not much you can do. Hang tight on the pruning and fertilization, but inspect them. This Gemini here is pretty clean. I see some spots on the Randy Scott. So I'll definitely have to start my spray program. Then eventually, as we get toward March or the last week of February, I will prune. You can see some winter dieback there. And again, not a big deal. You just prune down to the next bud eye, and there's some dormant ones there. So far so good. Hopefully we won't get any cold weather, at least extreme cold. We know where it's going to get cold here eventually, at least a few times before we hit the month of spring. So check out your garden. You might have to be spraying those fungicides a little earlier than you usually do. Comment below, what are you seeing in your garden? If you're across the eastern part of the United States, probably pretty far along like the rest of us with all that warm weather. We'll do another video coming up, hopefully to detail the weeding that is complete. And then after spraying, my next task is going to be getting that pre-emergent down so I don't have weed issues here this spring. Hope everybody's doing well. I'll last leave you with a shot of these roses from windy eastern North Carolina. Another windy evening across the area. Take care.